On July 8, 2022, former Japanese Prime Minister and largely the face of Japan for much of the rest of the world, Shinzo Abe, was assassinated outside a metro station in the city of Nara. Let's first look at the motive for the assassination, and then I want to talk a bit about why this is a huge deal. The suspect, who's essentially admitted his involvement, is 41-year-old Tetsuya Yamagami, a former non-commissioned officer in the Japanese Navy. It appears his grudge against Abe has to do with Abe's support for the Unification Church. This is a so-called new religious movement like the Falun Gong or similar groups, and shares many of the same ideological precepts, such as anti-Communism and a strong support for classicalist politics and capitalist economics. While Falun Gong is a Chinese movement mainly based in Taiwan, the Unification Church is based out of South Korea. It was founded by South Korean Messianic claimant Sun Myung Moon back in 1954. It's founded on the basis of mainstream Christianity, but deviates quite a bit. The church and its American branch have sometimes been labeled a cult for reasons ranging from the church's unusual rituals to its messianic ideas about Moon to the involvement of Moon's son in the arms trade and his linking of that to church ceremonies. Like Falun Gong, the church has an aggressive international political presence. For example, the church helped to start the conservative Washington newspaper, The Washington Times, back in 1976, as a counter to the perceived sympathies of the Washington Post towards both communism abroad and toward American and European pacifist groups. Like Falun Gong, the Unification Church has received the support of numerous political figures around the world. One of these was Shinzo Abe, who's one of the most notable Japanese political figures since the Second World War. Abe is the longest-serving prime minister in Japanese history, after a short 2-year stint in the mid-2000s, and then a lengthy stay from 2012 to 2020, during which he implemented his signature set of policies nicknamed Abenomics, a campaign mostly viewed as relatively successful. In any case, it was Abe's support for the Unification Church which became the issue for Yamagami. Yamagami's mother had donated large percentages of her assets and income to the church during a 5-year stint as a member in the late 90s and early 2000s. This included selling the house and land where the family had grown up. In 2002, she filed for bankruptcy. And around that time, Yamagami began seeking out Hak Jahan, Moon's wife, who was a major part of the church's administration. His plan was to stab her, but he never got the chance. Later, after Moon's death in 2012, Yamagami's mother returned to the church between 2017 and 2019. The late Moon's now widow was still alive, and Yamagami's mother's return to the fold prompted him to attempt to kill her once again, bringing a flamethrower to an event where he knew Hak Jahan would be in attendance, but the attempt failed after he wasn't allowed entry to the event. After Abe's resignation as prime minister in 2020 due to health reasons, he continued to support the Unification Church, including sending the group a video message of endorsement. However, Abe was not a member or an official of the church. Yamagami built homemade guns and explosives at his residence. One of these guns was the murder weapon used in the July 8th assassination. So why is this a big deal? Well, of course, in Japan, it's a huge deal and is being widely viewed across the political spectrum as a great national tragedy. Whether or not one agreed with Abe's policies, the fact that this was a former prime minister, especially one with as outsized an influence and legacy as Abe's, made this one of the darkest days in modern Japanese history. However, this assassination also matters globally. In an era where political polarization, inflamed by social media, threatens many countries with a free public discourse around the world, the assassination of a major world political leader harkens back to previous eras of political polarization. Such instances had decreased dramatically following the Cold War. For example, the last Japanese prime minister or former prime minister to be assassinated was in 1936, during the period of massive internal chaos that led up to World War II and the establishment of Tojo's fascist regime. Since the war, nothing like this had occurred again, and Japanese politics has been mostly cordial. The last assassination attempt against an American president was the shooting of Ronald Reagan in 1981, a shooting he survived but that grievously injured White House Press Secretary James Brady Kuwaiti, who was permanently disabled. The same year, an assassination attempt was made against Pope John Paul II, coming at a time of intense political intrigue in the Cold War, in which the Pope was heavily involved in both Europe and Latin America. Meanwhile, the last serious assassination plot of an American president came in 1993, when Kuwaiti intelligence thwarted a supposed Iraqi attempt on the life of George H.W. Bush. To further illustrate the decreased prevalence of political assassinations during the 90s and 2000s, back in 2007, with the killing of the former darling of the world's media, Pakistan's Benazir Bhutto. The world was shocked by this episode of political violence, which seemed to be an aberration. As shocked and dismayed as the world was at Bhutto's death, it was equally as saddened by the death of Jovenel Moïse, the president of Haiti, who was assassinated in 2021 in a seeming incident of gang violence rather than political violence, and was more indicative of the disastrous situation that has befallen Haiti in recent years. Abe's death, representing a return of assassination for political, religious, and personal reasons, had a profound effect on world geopolitics. Not only was he an icon domestically and the face of Japan abroad for years, but the climate of political polarization in many countries around the world at the time this assassination took place renders it a worrisome sign of the dangers of violence that come with political polarization, and along with numerous other global developments, should serve as a catalyst for countries affected by this issue to attempt to bridge their domestic political differences. This is, to put it mildly, a terrible event, especially in the context of both domestic political polarization and renewed great power competition on an ideological basis. In the latter context, this is a blow that will likely be exploited to its fullest extent by Beijing, yet could end up making its opponents stronger if countries use the event as a sober reminder of the dangers of polarization. This is certainly an assassination that has left the geopolitical world shaking, and our thoughts, of course, lay with the friends and family of the late Prime Minister. On a personal note, it was shocking to see the assassination of someone who was in power when we first started covering geopolitics. And I just wanted to express my thoughts as to why this was such a tragic and noteworthy event that should not be overlooked.